So both here and in China, we need to first weather the storm of public criticism and public distrust of higher education. And in China, there's not public distrust, there's government distrust of it. Here, under the current American administration, there is renewed public, through the government, distrust of universities, even though there isn't a member of Congress or an inhabitant of the White House who did not graduate from an American university. Nevertheless, you have a broad wish to change the way they operate. And this is reminiscent in this country, if it becomes more and more politicized, of the effort during the 1950s to root out so-called Reds, or leftists in American higher education, in which many American universities, including my own, did not cover themselves in glory by protecting their students or their faculty from government intrusion. We have to learn from that period that we can't be quiet. I'm William Kirby, and I teach at Harvard University, both at Harvard Business School and in our history department. And once upon a time, I was dean of our Faculty of Arts and Sciences. So my book, Empires of Ideas, came out of my long experience in American higher education, but also in my experience as a student in Germany and in German universities and a guest professor there, and as somebody who studies China and has visited many Chinese universities. And the arc of the book is, if the Germans defined the modern university in the 19th century, and the Americans then took that concept to a new level in the 20th century, what is the prospect of Chinese universities leading the world in the 21st century? But I first came to this idea when I went in the year 2010 to the 200th anniversary of what is today the Humboldt University in Berlin, the original research university, the model for all of us still to this day in so many ways. And it was a grand celebration of 200 years of the original University of Berlin. And the title of the conference was the Humboldt University of Berlin, the original model. And the president of the university welcomed us by saying, quote, "Nobody would take my university as a model for anything today." I was kind of surprised. And he was very quickly no longer the president of the Humboldt University. But I began to think, what does it mean? How do universities rise and fall? How do systems rise and fall in this highly competitive world of higher education? And having been dean of half of Harvard for a number of years, this was a concern of mine back at that time, but now I saw it right up front and center by a university that had once been the best in the world, today no longer the best in the world, no longer the best in Germany, no longer the best even in Berlin. When Prussia loses a war to Napoleon and loses a significant part of its territory and most of its universities to other German lands, it happens when the King of Prussia vows, and this is a quote that I've never heard from any other political leader, "We will replace with intellectual strength what we have lost in material strength." And he deputes Wilhelm von Humboldt and a series of other extraordinary Enlightenment intellectuals to come up with the idea of an altogether new Lehranstalt, a center for learning in Berlin, which had never had a university of any sort. And Humboldt's idea was to create something that had not been created before, a university whose purpose was not simply to transmit knowledge from one generation to another, but to create knowledge through research, through original research, and to create knowledge not by simply professors telling students what the new knowledge was, but by faculty and students working together in seminars and in laboratories to create knowledge. And they would do it with a high degree of Lehrfreiheit, freedom to teach, Lernfreiheit, freedom to learn, academic freedom, as we now understand it, articulated very strongly there. And they would do so with the academic decisions of making a great university up to the university itself. Even though 100% funded by the state, it would have institutional autonomy. And finally, Humboldt's belief was that the center of the university, whatever else it did, had to be the philosophical faculty, what we would today call the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the foundation of education for undergraduates and the center of many of our leading graduate disciplines as well. Even if one has, and as one has subsequently added on many professional schools, every great university in the world either has or aspires to have these principles as its foundation. Well, here at Harvard, the president of Harvard, at the time of our 200th anniversary, then President Quincy, believed in establishing some form of German model for the faculty, that they could be increasingly free to teach and create courses that were not part of a rote curriculum, which we had had in the past. But he didn't believe in the second part, that freedom, that the students would have freedom to learn. And in fact, he was such a disciplinarian, he personally graded the papers of every Harvard student. When Harvard was a lot smaller, the students hated him, and they burned his image in effigy in Harvard Yard one year, and he expelled the entire sophomore class. Different world. Fast forward, or a little bit forward, to the 1860s and 70s, when a new Harvard president, Charles Eliot, decides that Harvard is a very good college with a couple of regional professional schools, but it is not a university like Berlin. It is not a research place. It is not a place that creates knowledge. He creates the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. He has research as the foundation of the next stage of Harvard's development, here following not only the Germans, but the first movers in the United States, which had been Johns Hopkins University and the University of Chicago, founded as research universities on a German model. The oldest university in China dates from 1893, today the University of Wuhan, then called the Self-Strengthening Institute. Peking University dates its founding from 1898 as the Imperial University, Tsinghua University, 1911, so the turn of the previous century. And in that sense, they're not as old. No one is as old as Bologna, or they're not as old as Oxford or Cambridge. They're not as old as Harvard, which is soon to be 400 years old. But keep in mind that they're not that much older than the research universities that grew up in the United States in the middle of the 19th century. And they learned from European models and American models very quickly in trying to establish a foundation for a new China, for a China that needs a new form of education. The old examination system, which had venerated education, of course, for a millennium through that system, that ends in 1905. And it is replaced gradually but steadily by new forms of higher education in the form of Chinese domestic universities, public ones like Peking University and Tsinghua University, later to become a public one, by international joint ventures, as we would call them today, Yenjing University in Beijing, which is the campus of today's Peking University, St. John's College, later St. John's University in Shanghai, Jinling College in Nanjing. All of these, you have the growth of a remarkable, small but powerful and dynamic system of higher education from the turn of that century to 1949, of extraordinary scholars, many trained abroad as the faculty, to come back and teach a new generation of Chinese, whose mission is in good measure actually to make for a new China of the Republican period. And it has had an extraordinary impact in its time, maybe pound for pound, one of the best university systems in the world. But it would all be swept away or Sovietized with the communist takeover of China in 1949. It is the memory of the excellence of pre-communist universities that is in part fueling the ambitions for world-class status of Chinese universities today. I can tell you personally that the leaders of Peking University and Tsinghua University know very well the values of the great founders and the great chancellors of those universities during the Republican period, which valued freedom of speech, valued freedom of research, freedom of learning on the part of students, institutional autonomy, the many things that made them such an outstanding system before 1949. All Chinese universities were turned to the direct use of the state after 1949 and toward the purposes of Soviet-style 5-year plans with production quotas, as it were, of graduating students, or putting more and more resources into very applied disciplines, narrowly defined according to ministries and according to 5-year plans. So Tsinghua University, for example, lost almost all of its humanities. Many of them went to Peking University, and it became a polytechnic on the Soviet model. Today, it has been reinvented as a truly comprehensive university. And Peking University became the representative of many of the so-called Western disciplines of the social sciences, as well as being strong in science and perhaps not as strong in technology. But there was a differentiation based on how their graduates could serve better state planning. And the same would be true all over the country. Each place redefined on a Soviet model, pretty much until the Cultural Revolution, when they were nearly destroyed by Mao Zedong's efforts to overturn the system that he actually had led. Nothing can stop the preeminence of Chinese universities today, looking at the trajectory, except China itself. That is to say, no country invests more in higher education than China. And you compare that with the United States, where 44 out of 50 American states have disinvested in higher education since 2008. And right now, the federal government is looking to very much diminish the amount of funding for scientific research in universities. China, by contrast, has invested enormously in its human capital. And no place on earth has more of the best human capital than China. Not just simply by the size of its population, but by the quality of its education system. And you see, in terms of research universities, measuring the output of research according to recent international rankings, you'll see the rapid rise of Chinese universities. Americans are still in the ascendant, broadly speaking, in numbers, but according to a recent QS polls, one of the ranking systems of international universities, Tsinghua and Peking University ranked ahead of all but 2 of the so-called Ivy League here in the United States. Happily not above Harvard, but maybe now, maybe soon. And so there's extraordinary talent, extraordinary resources, the growth. It's the fastest growing system of higher education in quality as well as quantity in the world. Where are the tensions then? The tensions that can hold China back. Part of them, without question, are political, and political restraints which have increased over the last decade or so. The first is a governance system inherited from the Soviet Union in which there isn't one academic leader of an institution, not a great president, say like President Eliot, who turned Harvard into a major research university in the second half of the 19th century. But you have a president who broadly represents the academic excellence of the university. But you also have, often an excellent academic as well, a party secretary to oversee the university. And in recent years, the party secretary has been in ascendance over the president in decision-making. It's not easy to be the president or chief of any institution of higher education. The average tenure of an American university president today is shorter than that of an American undergraduate in college. Now, undergraduates take longer than you think, but it's like 5.2 years. It's shockingly smart. It's gotten much shorter over time. But try to run an institution with 2 presidents. When they agree, it can be a powerful alliance that protects the university from intrusion from the state. But where there's tension, then it leads to dysfunctional governance. So governance is a central part of the excellence of higher education anywhere in the world. And that's a challenge for universities. The second one, and a very major one, particularly in the humanities and the social sciences, is the growing eye of the state over what is taught and how it is taught in Chinese universities. Have been under the People's Republic always mandated courses, what in Chinese are called 必修课, that everyone has to take: Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, etc., etc., history of the party. But one could always teach them as a faculty member as one wished, with a lot of creativity and perhaps with enough nuance so that students would know to think for themselves about what they have heard. That's much more difficult today with increased state surveillance, including video and other surveillance of classrooms. And finally, I would say, and this is a challenge not just for Chinese, but also for other universities, a sense of what you can say and not say in a classroom. There was a formal rule in 2013 from the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party about the 7 things you cannot talk about in a university. And I always say when I give a speech in China, you know, a great university has to be a place in which there isn't one question that cannot be asked or one topic that cannot be raised, let alone 7. And when I say that in China, the people listening to me tend to agree very strongly, even if they cannot act on that at the moment. But when I gave a speech at Berkeley on the same theme, somebody raised their hand and said, well, you know, Professor Kirby, there are at least 7 things we can't say at Berkeley or at Harvard or elsewhere. And that doesn't come from censorship on top. It comes from peer pressure, social pressure, the sense of what's acceptable in society. And that's a problem for American universities, whose own record of academic freedom is much more uneven than we would like to remember. So both here and in China, we need to first weather the storm of public criticism and public distrust of higher education. And in China, there's not public distrust, there's government distrust of it. Here, under the current American administration, there is renewed public, through the government, distrust of universities, even though there isn't a member of Congress or an inhabitant of the White House who did not graduate from an American university. Nevertheless, you have a broad wish to change the way they operate. And this is reminiscent in this country, if it becomes more and more politicized, of the effort during the 1950s to root out so-called Reds, or leftists in American higher education, in which many American universities, including my own, did not cover themselves in glory by protecting their students or their faculty from government intrusion. We have to learn from that period that we can't be quiet when it comes to where the government will go. Our comrades in China are also not quiet, but they're not public in their criticism. They are strongly supportive of the norms of higher education the world over. This is why the presidents of the leading universities in China today, together with the presidents of the leading American, European, and Australian universities in 2013, signed a document on what are the characteristics of a great research university. And they talked about academic freedom, they talked about freedom of inquiry and speech, they talked about institutional autonomy. These are values that are shared across the world in the world of universities. But at the moment, they're under threat by governments also across the world. What can we do? We need to maintain our open scholarly communication lines with our friends in China and elsewhere. I'm helping to oversee Harvard's China policies and our engagement. We have a center in Shanghai that I chair. We are looking to expand what we are doing in China, even at this moment, when others are threatening to pull out or being told they ought to pull out. We started a new summer school in Shanghai. We may be opening a new facility in Beijing. We have a new language program in Taiwan. We believe that a great university like Harvard has to be connected with the great universities of the world in Europe and in China if we are going to continue to be competitive. That is where so much talent is. And if you ignore it, if you don't let students in from these countries, in particular from China, if you don't do joint research with them, then you yourself will decline because isolationism is a death sentence for universities. So why am I optimistic? Universities outlast governments. They actually outlast political systems. Peking University was founded in the late Qing dynasty under the Empress Dowager. It becomes a great public university in the early days of the Republic, which was kind of a military dictatorship but maintained its academic autonomy. It thrived in the Republican period under the national government. It survived the Japanese invasion, as did Tsinghua and other universities. And then it survived even Mao Zedong. If you can survive Mao Zedong, you can survive anything. These universities will be around a long. China will be around forever. These universities will be around a very long time. I very much hope that the United States, which is not quite as old as the last Chinese dynasty, the last of 24 dynasties, I hope we're around to watch this story as well.